Do you remember the unruly class of 5C and the teachers who tried to control them? In 1968, they were icons of television youth, making millions laugh every week. But off-screen, time told a far darker story, one filled with heartbreak, loneliness, and tragic endings no fan could have predicted. Today, we will reveal the untold secrets of their downfall. Joan Sanderson as Doris Ewell. When Please, Sir. Arrived on television in 1968, audiences were introduced to Joan Sanderson at the age of 56. She slipped effortlessly into the role of Doris Ewell, the sharp and unyielding school secretary who always seemed one step ahead of everyone else. Watching her on screen felt like watching a woman born for authority, measured, commanding, and unforgettable. Born on November 24, 1912, in Bristol, England, Joan's life was shaped less by glamour and more by determination. She married fellow actor Gregory Scott in 1948, and while their marriage lasted until her final days, her true devotion was always to her craft. The theater and television became her companions, and her marriage, though steady, often played a quiet second to the stage lights that defined her existence. But time had its revenge. In her later years, Sanderson endured long and draining illnesses that chipped away at her strength. The vibrant actress who once carried entire productions began to retreat from public view, her body no longer able to keep pace with the demands of her profession. Each performance in those final years carried a hidden weight, a battle she fought bravely against the decline that no applause could drown out. On May 24, 1992, Joan Sanderson passed away in Norwich at the age of 79. Her husband Gregory followed just months later, leaving behind the image of a couple bound until the end. At the time of her death, her estate was valued at roughly $2.5 million, built from decades on stage and screen. Derek Guyler as Norman Potter. Picture the school in Please, Sir, without Norman Potter, the caretaker who grumbled, scolded, and somehow stole every scene. That was Derek Guyler, stepping into the role in 1968 at the age of 54. His dry humor and perfectly timed expressions turned an ordinary janitor into one of the sitcom's most enduring characters. Born on April 29, 1914, in Wallasey, Cheshire, Guyler grew up far from the bright lights of television, yet he carried with him a love for performing and, even more, a longing for stability. In 1941, he married singer Margaret Mary McConnell, better known as Patty Lennox of the Lennox Sisters Trio. Their marriage spanned more than half a century, producing two sons, Peter and Christopher, and grounding him through the unpredictable storms of show business. But the years caught up with him. A lifelong smoker, Guyler eventually faced a battle with cancer that cast a long shadow over his later life. The energy that had once filled studios and radio halls was slowly drained away, leaving behind a man fighting quietly against time and illness. By 1993, he chose retirement in Queensland, Australia, near his son Chris and grandchildren. On October 7, 1999, Derek Guyler passed away in Sydney at the age of 85. His estate, worth around $2 million, was a testament to his long career. At his funeral in St. Mark's Catholic Church, his son read a eulogy that became a final, symbolic moment. Richard Davies as Mr. Price. Some teachers inspired with kindness, others survived with sarcasm. In Please, Sir. It was Richard Davies who brought sarcasm to life, playing Mr. Price in 1968 at just 42 years old. His weary science teacher, forever unimpressed and armed with a cutting remark, became a scene stealer, the perfect counterbalance to John Alderton's wide-eyed optimism. Born on January 25, 1926, in the Welsh village of Dowlais, Merthyr Tydfil, Davies began life as Dennis Wilfred Davies, the son of a railway guard. His personal journey was marked by two marriages, the first to Beryl Armstrong, ending in divorce and heartache. But in 1955, He found lasting peace with actress Jill Britton, his wife for nearly 60 years, with whom he raised 2 children. That quiet domestic anchor gave him strength, while the stage and screen demanded every ounce of his energy. Yet even strength has limits. In later years, Davies was overtaken by Alzheimer's disease, a cruel erosion of memory and wit. For an actor celebrated for his razor-sharp timing and caustic humor, the decline was devastating, not just for him, but for those who loved him, forced to watch as his quick tongue and bright mind dimmed. On October 8, 2015, Richard Davies died in Hampshire at the age of 89. His net worth, about $3.8 million, reflected decades of hard work across theater, film, and television. The most haunting image left behind is this. While Alzheimer's silenced him in life, every rerun of Please, Sir brings him back as Mr. Price, world-weary, sharp-eyed, and immortal on screen. Noel Howlett as Mr. Cromwell. In 1968, Please, Sir introduced viewers to a headmaster who seemed well-meaning, yet utterly powerless to control his school. That man was Noel Howlett, who joined the cast at 66 years old, playing Mr. Cromwell with the perfect mix of charm and futility. His gentle academic presence quickly became a defining feature of the series. Born on December 22, 1902, in Maidstone, Kent, Howlett originally considered becoming a teacher before turning to the stage. From the early 1930s, he built a steady career in theater, later taking character roles in film and television. Behind the curtain, his life was marked by personal devotion to his wife, a bond that carried him for decades but left him vulnerable to deep loneliness after her passing. That loneliness grew heavier in his later years. With no children to care for him, Howlett slipped into depression, a stark contrast to the benevolent clergymen and academics he so often portrayed. His final years were quieter, overshadowed by a sense of isolation and the gradual decline of his health. On October 26, 1984, Noel Howlett died in Hammersmith, London, at the age of 81. His estate, valued at about $1.3 million, reflected a lifetime of work across stage and screen. The most symbolic image left behind is of Mr. Cromwell himself, kind but ineffectual, forever reminding viewers of a man who gave so much life to characters while privately fighting battles of his own. Eric Chitty as Mr. Smith. Some characters in Please, Sir blended into the background, while others lingered in memory for their warmth and quirkiness. Eric Chitty, at 61 years old in 1968, gave audiences the bumbling but endearing Mr. Smith, a presence that made classrooms feel just a little more human. Born on July 8, 1907 in Dover, Kent, Chitty came from modest beginnings as the son of a flour miller. He studied law at Dover College and Cambridge before following his true passion for acting at RADA. In 1936, he married actress Hester Bevan, and together they raised 3 children. His family life offered him stability, even as his on-screen roles often painted him as nervous or worried. Yet tragedy struck sooner than expected. Though his career reached international audiences with roles in Dr. Zhivago and even Doctor Who, Chitty's health declined rapidly. Heart failure and liver cancer robbed him of time, cutting short a career that still held so much promise. On July 22, 1977, Eric Chitty passed away in Harrow, London, at the age of 70. His net worth, about $1 million, was modest compared to the legacy he left on stage and television. The most haunting memory is how suddenly it ended. One moment he was still appearing on screen, and the next, his voice was silenced. Yet every rerun of Please, Sir brings back Mr. Smith, anxious, gentle, and unforgettable. Peter Denyer as Dennis Dunstable. He was only 21 when he shuffled onto our screens in 1968 as Dennis Dunstable, the lovable but dim pupil of Class 5C in Please, Sir. Peter Denyer's comic timing turned a simple character into one of the show's most endearing figures. For many fans, he embodied the cheeky innocence of youth, forever etched in the world of British comedy. Born on August 20th, 1947, in Dartford, Kent, Peter's journey to television stardom began on the stage, where he first appeared at just 19. Unlike many of his co-stars, he never married, devoting himself instead to his craft. Over the years, he transitioned from acting to writing and directing pantomimes, becoming one of Britain's most successful figures in that field. His personal life remained quiet, defined more by work and friendships than by family headlines. But tragedy caught up with him far too soon. In his later years, Peter fought a painful battle with liver cancer. For a man whose career had been built on laughter and light-hearted roles, the cruel disease was a stark reminder of how fleeting joy can be behind the curtain. On September 18, 2009, Peter Denyer died in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, at the age of 62. His net worth, estimated at $1.5 million, came largely from decades of television work and pantomimes. The image that lingers is of Dennis Dunstable's goofy grin, immortalized on screen, while off-screen, Peter faced a much harsher ending than his audience ever imagined. Liz Gebhardt as Maureen Bullock. When Please Sir premiered in 1968, 23-year-old Liz Gebhardt stepped into the role of Maureen Bullock, the spirited schoolgirl of 5C. Her sharp wit and energy made Maureen a standout in the rowdy classroom, and audiences quickly took notice. For many viewers, she was the spark that kept the class alive. Born on April 12, 1945 in Liverpool, Liz carved out a busy career beyond Please Sir, appearing in Dear Mother, Love Albert, The Bill, Keeping Up Appearances, and countless BBC radio dramas. In her personal life, she married actor and theater director Ian Talbot in 1968, and together they raised a child. Behind the screen, success, family, and marriage became her anchor, balancing the demands of a restless career. But life dealt her a cruel hand. Liz was diagnosed with cancer in the mid-1990s, and though she fought bravely, her treatment left her with devastating side effects. The disease, compounded by injuries from radiotherapy, marked her final years with pain and frustration. On August 10, 1996, Liz Gebhardt died in London at the age of just 51. Her net worth, about $650,000, reflected her steady work in television and radio. Yet numbers tell so little. The real memory is of Maureen Bullock's firecracker spirit, forever young on screen, while off-screen Liz's life was cut tragically short. Malcolm McFee as Peter Craven. When Please Sir first aired in 1968, audiences were introduced to the cheeky charm of Peter Craven, played by a then 19-year-old Malcolm McFee. With his mischievous grin and quick wit, McFee embodied the restless energy of youth, and for many viewers, he became one of the most unforgettable pupils of Class 5C. Born on August 16, 1949, in London, McFee's path wasn't all glitter and laughter. He married Margaret Kiernan in 1971, and together they had 3 children, including daughter Victoria. But the pressures of career and personal struggles eventually fractured their bond, and the couple divorced in 1995. Behind the fame, McFee's private life carried as many complications as the chaotic classroom he once acted in. Then came the cruel twist. A lifelong smoker with a relentless pace, McFee was struck down by cancer. Even as illness gripped him, he remained committed to his craft, raising money for the oncology department of Broomfield Hospital in gratitude for his care. But the disease drained his strength, cutting short a career that still held promise. On November 18, 2001, Malcolm McFee died at his home in Essex at just 52 years old. His net worth, around $900,000, was modest compared to the impact he left behind. He had been scheduled to appear in a pantomime only weeks later, a poignant symbol of an actor who never stopped working until the very end. Wendy Richard as Rita. By 1971, Please Sir had already become a household name, And into the mix came Wendy Richard at 28, stepping into the role of Rita. Her sharp delivery and screen presence gave the classroom drama a new spark. Though her time in the series was brief, she left a mark that pointed toward even greater stardom ahead. Born on July 20th, 1943, in Middlesbrough, North Yorkshire, Richard lived a personal life that was as turbulent as it was public. She married 4 times, with marriages that ranged from fleeting months to nearly 2 decades. In 2008, already gravely ill, she married John Burns, 20 years her junior, in a quiet Mayfair ceremony. He would remain by her side until the very end. Richard's greatest battle was not on screen, but against breast cancer. First diagnosed in 1996, she endured surgery, remission, recurrence in 2002, and finally the devastating spread of the disease by 2008. Even then, she faced it with remarkable courage, documenting her last 3 months in a BBC special, refusing to hide her struggle from the public who had loved her for decades. On February 26, 2009, Wendy Richard died in London at the age of 65, with her husband at her bedside. Her fortune, around $6.5 million, was built on iconic roles in Are You Being Served? And EastEnders. In a hauntingly symbolic gesture, the BBC aired a tribute episode of EastEnders the very night she passed, a final bow for a woman who had lived and died under the lights. Molly Sugden as Alice Larch. When Please Sir introduced Molly Sugden in 1971, she was already 49 years old, a familiar face in British comedy. Playing Alice Larch, she carried into the show the same sharp wit that would soon make her famous in Are You Being Served? Her arrival wasn't about promise. It was about presence. Born on July 21st, 1922, in Keighley, Yorkshire, Molly found her greatest happiness in family. She married fellow actor William Moore in 1958, and together they raised twin sons. For decades, their marriage offered her stability against the unpredictable rhythm of show business. But when Moore passed away in 2000, her later years were marked by a quiet loneliness that fame could never fill. Age brought more than solitude. Molly's health began to falter, and her once boundless energy faded under the weight of prolonged illness. The woman who once dominated stages and sitcoms was now retreating, her voice weaker, her presence quieter, even as her legacy continued to play out nightly on television. On July 1st, 2009, Molly Sugden passed away in Guildford, Surrey, just weeks before her 87th birthday. With a net worth of about $5 million, she left behind a career that had defined British comedy. The most poignant image remains her last public appearance, at the funeral of her co-star Wendy Richard, a farewell that seemed to symbolize the closing of an entire era of laughter. Geoffrey Hughes as Mr. Turner. In 1969, 25-year-old Geoffrey Hughes strode into Please Sir as Mr. Turner, injecting the series with a youthful charm that audiences immediately embraced. He wasn't flashy. He was relatable, the kind of presence that made classrooms feel alive. That down-to-earth quality would follow him throughout his career. Born on February 2nd, 1944, in Wallasey, Cheshire, Hughes built a life as steady as the roles he played. In 1975, he married Susan Mundell, and together they carved out decades of companionship. Beyond acting, he was deeply involved in community traditions, from Morris dancing to folk festivals, becoming as much a cultural figure off-screen as he was on. But the same life that brought joy also brought suffering. Hughes was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 1996, a disease he fought for over a decade. The illness forced him to retreat from acting in 2010, cutting short a career that still had more to give. His public cheer hid a private battle, one he fought with resilience until the end. On July 27, 2012, Geoffrey Hughes died peacefully in his sleep on the Isle of Wight at the age of 68. His net worth, around $3.2 million, was the fruit of decades of work across beloved British television. To this day, he is remembered not only as Mr. Turner, but as the everyman actor who gave audiences a reflection of themselves, ordinary, resilient, and unforgettable. Vivien Martin as Miss Petting. She was 41 when she walked into Please Sir in 1971, playing the sharp-tongued Miss Petting. Vivien Martin didn't need long to make an impression. Her authority and wit cut through the classroom chaos and gave the series an unexpected edge. For audiences, her presence was small but striking, a performance you couldn't ignore. Born on December 28, 1930, in Kaitaia, New Zealand, Martin carried her determination from the stage into her personal life. In 1976, she married actor John Burgess, but the marriage collapsed after just 6 weeks. The brevity of that union left behind an echo of loneliness that would never fully leave her. After stepping away from the screen, she lived quietly in retirement. But time proved merciless. Her health weakened, her circle grew smaller, and she faced the final stretch of life largely alone. The strength once seen in her characters faded into silence. On January 22, 2023, Vivien Martin died at the age of 92. Her net worth, about $1.3 million, stood as proof of a long career. Yet the most symbolic note is that her death was not announced by family, but by Equity, the actors' union, a final reminder that her truest bond was always with the craft itself. John Alderton as Bernard Hedges. At just 28, John Alderton became the beating heart of Please Sir. In 1968, playing Bernard Hedges, the fresh, optimistic teacher who tried to tame Class 5C. His boyish charm and warmth turned the series from a simple sitcom into a cultural hit. To many, Alderton wasn't just acting. He was teaching an entire generation how to laugh at life's chaos. Born on November 27, 1940 in Gainsborough, Lincolnshire, Alderton lived a personal story as eventful as his screen life. After divorcing actress Jill Brown, he found lasting love with actress Pauline Collins in 1969. Their marriage, spanning decades, brought them 3 children and one of the most admired partnerships in British television. But even beloved figures faced decline. In later years, Alderton struggled with the quiet battles of old age, slowed health, fading strength, and the decision to retreat from the spotlight early. It was a conscious choice to protect his peace, far from the stress and pressures of fame. Today, in 2025, John Alderton is 84 years old. His net worth, around $13 million, reflects a career crowned by upstairs, downstairs. The most poignant image is of him still beside Pauline Collins, 2 actors whose love endured longer than any script, offering a rare happy ending in a world so often marked by tragedy. Peter Cleall as Eric Duffy. Cheeky, sharp, and always ready with a one-liner, Eric Duffy lit up Please Sir when it debuted in 1968. Played by a 24-year-old Peter Cleall, the wise-cracking student quickly became one of the show's most memorable faces. For 4 seasons, Cleall's Duffy embodied the rebellious energy of the late 60s classroom. Born on March 16, 1944 in Finchley, London, Cleall was far from the troublemaker he played. Educated at Brighton College and trained at East 15 Acting School, he came from a disciplined background. His father worked as a draftsman. But while his career took off on stage and screen, his private life was marked by turbulence. His first marriage to Catherine McNamara ended in divorce, though it brought him 2 sons, Miles and Damien, before he later found stability with his second wife, Dione Inman, raising 2 more children, Daniel and Spencer. As the years went on, Cleall slowly drifted away from acting. He appeared in cult comedies like Confessions of a Pop Performer, 1975, and in stage productions across Britain, but behind the scenes he faced the difficult transition from actor to agent. The entertainment industry can be cruel to those who move off stage, and Cleall had to prove himself all over again, this time negotiating contracts instead of playing to applause. Now, in 2025, Peter Cleall is 81 years old and lives a quieter life. He helps run Pelham Associates in Brighton, guiding new actors instead of competing with them. With a net worth of around $2.6 million, he is one of the rare Please Sir stars who found a second act in the same world that once threatened to forget him. David Barry as Frankie Abbott. Every classroom has its loudmouth, and in Please Sir, it was Frankie Abbott, the gum-chewing tough guy who secretly lived under his mother's shadow. David Barry was just 25 when he first stepped into Frankie's shoes in 1968. And audiences instantly loved the contradiction, a swaggering boy who wasn't nearly as tough as he thought. Born on April 30th, 1943, in Bangor, Wales, David Barry, real name Muireann Gwyn Jones, grew up far from the limelight. Acting offered him escape, and Please Sir gave him a character who became both his blessing and his curse. Off-screen, he wrestled with being typecast. The world saw him as Abbott long after the cameras stopped rolling, a role that often overshadowed his wider talents. But Barry refused to vanish. He reinvented himself as a writer, penning episodes of The Fen Street Gang, the sitcom Keep It in the Family, and even crime novels like Each Man Kills. Still, there was always a touch of tragedy. Returning to Frankie in his own play decades later, Barry seemed to acknowledge that the character had never truly let him go. Today, David Barry is 82 years old and living in Tunbridge Wells, Kent. With an estimated net worth of $2 million, he continues to write and occasionally appear on stage. For fans, the most symbolic image is of Barry revisiting Frankie Abbott in later life, an actor finally making peace with the character that defined him. Susan Farmer as Miss Judith Bower. When Please Sir aired its early seasons in 1969, a touch of elegance arrived in the corridors of Fen Street. At just 27, Susan Farmer stepped into the role of Miss Judith Bower, the intelligent and stylish young teacher who often provided a romantic spark opposite Bernard Hedges. Across 10 to 15 episodes, her graceful presence stood out as a contrast to the chaos of 5C. Born on June 16, 1942 in Maidstone, Kent, Farmer's early years were anything but graceful. Both parents struggled with alcoholism, and when her father died bankrupt before she turned 8, Susan and her brother Michael were left in poverty. Stigma and neglect shadowed her childhood, fueling a hunger to escape through the stage and screen. That drive pushed her into Hammer horror films of the 1960s, where she became a celebrated scream queen. Yet behind the stardom, darkness followed. Married to actor Ian McShane from 1965 to 1968, their union collapsed under the weight of pressure, jealousy, and her growing dependence on alcohol. By her late 30s, alcoholism and depression had consumed much of her career. Hospitalizations for seizures and liver complications turned her once promising trajectory into a tragic decline, leaving her isolated and retreating from the industry she once lit up. On September 17, 2017, Susan Farmer died of cancer in London, aged 75. Her net worth, estimated at $1 million, reflected both her Hammer horror fame and her TV appearances, though diminished by years of medical costs. The cast of Please Sir gave us laughter that still echoes after more than half a century. Their legacy remains, but so do the questions about how fame can shape and break a life. Which story touched you the most? Share your thoughts below, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that deserve to be remembered.